The autumn sun cast long shadows across the sprawling grounds of Fort Braxton as Chen shuffled through the main gate. Clutching a crumpled campus map and wearing an oversized pink hoodie that seemed to swallow her petite frame. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished concrete as she approached the massive demonstration tent, where the thunderous crack of gunfire and the sharp commands of drill sergeants created a symphony of military precision. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice barely above a whisper, raising her hand tentatively, like a student asking permission to use the bathroom. "Is this where the career fair thing is happening?" Staff Sergeant William Bull Morrison, a mountain of a man whose biceps strained against his dress uniform, turned from the weapons display table with the kind of predatory grin reserved for fresh meat. His chest bore enough ribbons to stock a craft store, and his reputation for breaking recruits was legendary throughout the base. Behind him, a collection of seasoned soldiers, Corporal Jenkins with his 1,000-yard stare, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez with arms like tree trunks, and Private Martinez, who'd earned his stripes in 3 combat tours, all paused their demonstrations to assess the newcomer. Well, Bull drawled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years turning civilians into soldiers. "Look what the wind blew in, boys. You lost, sweetheart. The community college job fair is about 20 miles that way." He jerked his thumb toward the exit, eliciting chuckles from his crew. Maya's cheeks flushed pink as she fumbled with her oversized purse, nearly dropping it in her apparent nervousness. "No, sir, I mean no. I'm Maya Chen. I'm actually really interested in, military opportunities." A voice cracked slightly on the word military, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with trembling fingers. The soldiers exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Jenkins rolled his eyes skyward, as if asking for divine intervention. Rodriguez muttered something in Spanish that definitely wasn't a compliment. Martinez just shook his head and returned to cleaning his M4, clearly dismissing her as a waste of time. But Maya's eyes, those were different. While her body language screamed civilian amateur, her gaze swept the tent with methodical precision. She cataloged exit points, noted the positions of armed personnel, and unconsciously positioned herself with her back to a support beam that provided cover from 3 angles. It was a movement so subtle, so ingrained, that even trained observers might miss it. But in the VIP section, separated from the main demonstration area by bulletproof glass, General Marcus Kane noticed everything. Kane was a legend in military circles, a man whose face bore the roadmap of 30 years in special operations. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw was a souvenir from Fallujah. The slight limp in his right leg came courtesy of an IED in Afghanistan. His chest displayed the Medal of Honor, 3 Purple Hearts, and decorations from conflicts most people couldn't pronounce. When Kane watched something, it was with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. "So, what exactly interests you about military service, Princess?" Bull asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "The free health care? The travel opportunities? Or maybe you saw Top Gun and thought it looked fun?" Maya's response came with a stutter that seemed almost rehearsed. "Well, I've always been interested in, marksmanship. My dad took me hunting a few times when I was little, and I thought maybe I could learn more about, shooting and stuff." The tent erupted in laughter. Jenkins nearly choked on his coffee. Rodriguez slapped his knee and said something about Bambi hunters wanting to play soldier. Even some of the civilian visitors joined in, pointing and whispering among themselves about the delusional college girl. But Maya's reaction was telling. Instead of shrinking away or becoming defensive, she absorbed the mockery with an almost zen-like calm. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged. Most civilians would have fled by now, but she stood her ground with quiet determination that seemed oddly out of character for someone so apparently timid. "Shooting and stuff," Bull repeated, wiping tears from his eyes. "Oh, honey, this isn't a BB gun range at the county fair. This is serious military hardware. We're talking about weapons that can put a round through an engine block at 1,000 yards. Maya's eyes brightened with what appeared to be naive enthusiasm. "Really? That sounds amazing. Could I maybe try one? Just to see what it's like?" The laughter reached a crescendo. Martinez actually fell off his chair. Jenkins was doubled over, gasping for air. Even some of the other recruits, young men who'd come here with dreams of military glory, joined in the mockery, grateful to have someone lower on the pecking order than themselves. "Try one." Bull wheezed, struggling to catch his breath. "Sweetheart, do you have any idea what you're asking? That Barrett .50 cal over there weighs 30 pounds and has a recoil that would put you flat on your back. The scope alone costs more than your car." As Maya fumbled with her purse again, seemingly flustered by the attention, several items spilled onto the concrete floor. A compact mirror, lip gloss, what appeared to be mascara, and a small tube that rolled under the nearest table. She scrambled to collect her belongings, apologizing profusely for the mess. "I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz," she stammered, crawling partially under the table to retrieve the wayward tube. "I just get nervous around all these impressive military people." What the laughing crowd didn't notice was how Maya's movements under that table were anything but clumsy. Her hand found the tube with predatory precision, and for just a moment, the label was visible to anyone paying close attention. Woodland camouflage paint, military grade. She palmed it smoothly and emerged with what appeared to be a tube of concealer. Her face flushed with embarrassment. General Kane's hand moved to the secure satellite phone clipped to his belt. His weathered fingers traced the device's surface as he watched Maya's performance with growing intensity. 30 years of combat experience had taught him to recognize things others missed. The way she'd positioned herself. The tactical awareness masked his nervousness. The fact that she hadn't actually answered any direct questions about her background. "Please," Maya continued, her voice taking on a pleading quality that somehow managed to sound both pathetic and determined. "I know I probably look ridiculous to you all, but I really want to learn. My grandfather was in the military, and he always said that anyone could learn to shoot if they had the right teacher." Bull wiped his eyes and looked around at his men, all of whom were still chuckling at the spectacle. The crowd of onlookers had grown, drawn by the entertainment value of watching a civilian make a fool of herself. Camera phones were already out, ready to capture what promised to be an epic failure for social media posterity. "You know what?" Bull said, his grin turning predatory. "I'll tell you what, princess. I'm feeling generous today. How about we set up a little demonstration? Nothing too challenging, just a simple shot to show you what real marksmanship looks like." Maya's face lit up with apparent joy, but for just a fraction of a second, something else flickered in her eyes. Something cold and calculating that vanished so quickly it might have been imagination in the VIP section. General Kane's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression grew even more serious. The message was brief. "Black Talon final assessment in progress. Maintain observation protocol." The stage was set, the players in position, and Maya Chen, whoever she really was, had just accepted an invitation that would change everything. Bull Morrison cracked his knuckles with the satisfaction of a man about to deliver a lesson that would be remembered for years. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, recruits, family members, and even some off-duty personnel who'd heard about the entertainment unfolding at the demonstration tent. Someone had started a betting pool on whether the college girl would even be able to lift the rifle. "All right, Princess," Bull announced, his voice carrying across the tent like a drill sergeant addressing a formation. "Since you're so eager to play soldier, let's give you the full experience." He gestured grandly toward the weapons display, where the Barrett M82, A 1.50 caliber sniper rifle sat like a sleeping predator on its bipod. The massive weapon gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its scope catching reflections that seemed to wink at the gathering crowd. Maya clasped her hands together in apparent delight, bouncing slightly on her toes. "Oh my gosh, really? You'd let me try that big one?" Her voice carried the breathless excitement of a child being offered a ride on a roller coaster. But General Kane noticed how her eyes had already begun calculating angles and distances with mathematical precision. "Oh, we're not just going to let you try it," Corporal Jenkins chimed in, sensing an opportunity to pile on the humiliation. "We're going to set up a proper challenge. Can't have you thinking this is some kind of game." Rodriguez was already moving toward the range control station, his fingers dancing over the computerized targeting system. "What do you think, Bull? Standard recruit qualification. 300 meters, stationary target?" Bull's grin widened to show teeth that had seen too much coffee and too many cigars. "Oh no, boys. If little Maya here wants to play with the big guns, she gets the big boy treatment." He turned to address the crowd, playing to his audience like a carnival barker. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a classic case of civilian overconfidence. So we're going to cure that with some good old-fashioned reality." The crowd murmured with anticipation as Bull began outlining his sadistic plan. Maya stood quietly to the side, her hands folded in front of her, looking for all the world like a lamb being led to slaughter. But her breathing had subtly changed, deeper, more controlled. The kind of respiratory pattern taught in advanced combat training. "Here's the deal, sweetheart," Bull continued, his voice taking on the tone of a predator toying with prey. "We're going to set up a shot that would challenge a Marine Corps sniper. 1,200 meters. That's about 3/4 of a mile for those keeping track at home. Moving target, because stationary is for amateurs. And just to make it interesting." He paused for dramatic effect, consulting his weather app with theatrical precision. "Current wind conditions are gusting between 15 and 25 miles per hour, with crosswinds that'll make your bullet dance like a drunk sailor." The crowd gasped appropriately. Even some of the experienced soldiers looked impressed by the difficulty level Bull was proposing. Maya's face went pale, and she seemed to shrink into her oversized hoodie. "Wait, there's more," Bull announced, clearly enjoying himself. "The target isn't going to be some nice big bullseye. We're talking about a playing card, specifically the ace of spades mounted on a remote-controlled vehicle moving at 15 miles per hour in an unpredictable pattern." Jenkins whistled low. "Damn, Bull, that's a shot that would give our best snipers trouble." "Exactly the point," Bull replied, his eyes never leaving Maya's increasingly worried face. "What our little college girl here misses, and she will miss. Spectacularly, maybe she understands that military service isn't some romantic adventure from the movies." Maya's voice came out as barely a whisper. "That sounds really hard. Maybe I should just watch instead?" "Oh, no," Bull said, wagging his finger like a disapproving parent. "You wanted to try the rifle, remember? Besides, I've got a proposition that'll make this interesting for everyone." He raised his voice to address the crowd. "When not if, when Miss Chen here fails to even come close to the target, she buys drinks for my entire unit at Murphy's Bar tonight. We're talking about a tab that'll run close to $300. The crowd cheered its approval. Someone shouted, "What if she actually hits it?" which prompted another wave of laughter. Bull pretended to consider this impossibility. "Well, if by some miracle she manages to hit that target, I'll personally recommend her for advanced sniper training and eat my hat on camera." He turned back to Maya with mock seriousness. "But don't worry, Princess. I've been wearing this hat for 5 years, and it's never been in danger." Maya bit her lower lip, a gesture that made her look even younger and more vulnerable. "I don't know if I have $300. Then maybe you should have thought of that before asking to play with weapons that cost more than most people's cars," Rodriguez called out, earning another round of laughter from the crowd. But Maya straightened her shoulders with what appeared to be naive determination. "Okay, I'll try. But could someone maybe show me how to hold it properly? I don't want to hurt myself." The condescension in Bull's voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Of course, sweetheart. Can't have you getting a boo-boo on my watch." He gestured toward the rifle with exaggerated courtesy. "Right this way to your lesson in reality." As Maya approached the Barrett, something subtle began to change. Her shuffling gait became more purposeful, though she maintained the appearance of nervous uncertainty. When she reached the weapon, she paused, her hand hovering over the stock as if afraid to touch it. "It's so big," she murmured, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Are you sure it's safe?" "Safe as houses, Princess," Bull assured her, moving to stand behind the rifle. "Now, the first thing you need to understand is that this weapon has a recoil that'll knock you into next week, if you're not ready for it. Most men twice your size have trouble handling it." Maya nodded earnestly, but General Kane noticed how her eyes were systematically cataloging every aspect of the weapon's configuration. The scope settings, the bipod adjustment, the ammunition type visible in the magazine. Her gaze lingered on details that most civilians wouldn't even recognize, let alone understand. "The effective range of this beauty is over a mile," Bull continued his lecture, clearly enjoying his role as the expert instructor. "But what we're asking you to do today is beyond the capabilities of most trained snipers. The target is moving, the wind is unpredictable, and the distance requires calculations that take years to master." "Calculations?" Maya asked, her voice carrying just the right note of confusion. "Oh yes," Jenkins jumped in, unable to resist adding to the education. "You've got to account for bullet drop, wind drift, target movement, atmospheric pressure, humidity, temperature. It's like solving a complex physics equation in your head while someone's shooting at you." Maya's eyes widened with apparent amazement. "Wow, that sounds really complicated. How do you remember all of that?" "Years of training, sweetheart," Bull said, patting the rifle stock with proprietary affection. "Years of training that you don't have." But as Maya finally placed her hands on the weapon, something fundamental shifted. The trembling in her fingers stopped. Her breathing pattern changed from nervous and shallow to deep and controlled. Her stance, which had been awkward and uncertain, suddenly displayed a subtle understanding of balance and positioning that shouldn't exist in a civilian. The transformation was so gradual, so expertly managed, that most of the crowd missed it entirely. They were too busy laughing and placing bets to notice that Maya Chen was no longer the same person who had stumbled into their tent 20 minutes earlier. In the VIP section, General Kane's secure phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. Subject demonstrating textbook cover maintenance under extreme social pressure. Recommend proceeding to final phase. Kane's weathered hand moved to his radio, and he spoke in a voice so low that even his aide couldn't hear the words. But somewhere in the distance, unseen observers began moving into position, and the real test was about to begin. Maya's transformation was like watching a butterfly emerge from its chrysalis, except this metamorphosis revealed something far more dangerous than beautiful. As her hand settled onto the Barrett stock, the nervous college girl began to evaporate, replaced by something that moved with predatory grace. "Okay, Princess," Bull said, his voice still dripping with condescension as he positioned himself beside her. "First thing you need to know is how to get behind the scope without giving yourself a black eye. This isn't your daddy's hunting rifle." Maya nodded with apparent eagerness, but her movements as she settled into position behind the weapon were fluid and practiced. She adjusted the bipod legs with subtle precision, her body naturally finding the optimal shooting stance. The oversized hoodie that had made her look childish now seemed to flow around her like camouflage, and her breathing had settled into the rhythmic pattern of someone who understood the relationship between heartbeat and trigger pull. "Wind speed?" she asked quietly, her voice having dropped half an octave from its earlier nervous pitch. Bull blinked, momentarily thrown by the technical nature of the question. What?" "The wind speed," Maya repeated, her eye now pressed to the scope as she began scanning the range. "You mentioned crosswinds. I need to know the exact velocity and direction if I'm going to make any kind of adjustment." Jenkins exchanged a glance with Rodriguez. That wasn't the kind of question they'd expected from someone who'd been asking about shooting and stuff 10 minutes earlier. "Right. Now we're looking at gusts between 18 and 23 miles per hour, Rodriguez called out, consulting his range instruments with newfound seriousness. "Primary direction is northwest, but it's shifting." Maya's response was a barely audible copy, followed by what sounded suspiciously like mathematical calculations whispered under her breath. The crowd, which had been buzzing with anticipation and mockery, began to quiet as they sensed something had changed. "Ammunition specifications?" Maya asked, her voice now carrying an edge of professional competence that made Bull's confident smirk falter. "Match grade .5 OBNG, 750 grain boat tail," Bull replied automatically, his drill sergeant training kicking in before his brain could catch up. "Muzzle velocity approximately 2,800 feet per second." Maya nodded and made minute adjustments to the scope, her fingers moving with the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of hours of practice. The nervous fumbling was completely gone, replaced by movements so precise they seemed almost mechanical. "Target distance confirmed at 1,200 meters?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that made the hair on the back of Bull's neck stand up. That's right," he stammered, suddenly feeling like he'd lost control of his own demonstration in the VIP section. General Kane had moved to the edge of his seat, his scarred hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. His aide, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, leaned close enough to whisper, "Sir, should we maintain position?" Kane cut her off, his eyes never leaving the figure behind the rifle. "Let it play out." Maya's breathing had become so controlled it was barely visible. Her body had settled into the kind of absolute stillness that professional snipers spent years learning to achieve. When she spoke again, her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had done this before many times before. "Target is mobile, correct? 15 miles per hour. Random pattern?" "Yes," Bull managed, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "But listen, maybe we should start with something easier." "Negative," Maya interrupted, and the single word carried enough authority to silence a man who'd been giving orders for 15 years. "I'm ready." The crowd had gone completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something far beyond their understanding. Even the most experienced soldiers present felt the change in atmosphere, the way the air seemed to thicken with tension and possibility. Maya's finger found the trigger with the kind of familiarity that spoke of countless hours of training. Her breathing slowed to the point where her chest barely moved. Through the scope, he tracked the distant target, a playing card mounted on a remote-controlled vehicle that was weaving an unpredictable path across the range. "Wind shift," she murmured, making a microscopic adjustment to her aim, compensating for target velocity and atmospheric pressure differential. Bull's mouth fell open. Those weren't words that should be coming from a civilian's mouth. Those were the technical terms used by advanced military snipers, spoken with the casual confidence of someone who understood ballistics at a level that took years to master. The mathematical calculations Maya was performing in her head would have challenged a computer. Bullet drop over 1,200 meters. Wind drift compensation for a 20-mile-per-hour crosswind. Target movement prediction. Atmospheric pressure adjustments. Temperature and humidity factors. All of it processed in seconds by a mind that had been trained to think like a ballistics computer. Acquiring target? Maya whispered, and her voice had gone completely flat, emotionless, professional. The college girl was gone entirely now, replaced by something that moved with the cold precision of a machine designed for one purpose. The Barrett's massive scope tracked the distant target with mechanical smoothness. Maya's breathing had synchronized with her heartbeat, and she waited for that perfect moment between beats when her body would be absolutely still. Target acquired. Wind steady. Range confirmed. Bull tried to speak, tried to stop what was happening, but no words came. He was watching something that shouldn't exist. Transformation so complete, it defied explanation. Maya's finger began to apply pressure to the trigger with the kind of control that came from muscle. Memory burned into her nervous system through endless repetition. The massive rifle, which should have been unwieldy in her small hands, seemed to have become an extension of her body. On target, she breathed. And time seemed to slow. The Barrett M82 A1 erupted with a sound like thunder. The massive .50 caliber round leaving the barrel at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The recoil, which should have knocked Maya backward, was absorbed by a body that had been trained to handle forces that would flatten most people. She rode the recoil like a surfer riding a wave, her position barely shifting. For 2.3 seconds, the world held its breath as the bullet traveled its impossible trajectory. 1,200 meters of distance. Crosswinds that should have sent the round spinning into oblivion. A target moving at 15 miles per hour in an unpredictable pattern. The playing card disintegrated. Not hit. Not damaged. Completely destroyed, as if it had been struck by lightning. The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to have physical weight. 50 people stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if nature itself was paying respect to what had just occurred. Bull's face had gone white as paper. His mouth moved soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. Rodriguez crossed himself and whispered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. Jenkins simply stared, his 1,000-yard stare having been replaced by something approaching awe. Then, cutting through the silence like a blade through silk, came the sound of slow, measured footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who had been waiting for this moment. General Marcus Kane emerged from the shadows of the VIP section, his scarred face grave as death, his eyes locked on the figure behind the rifle. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 30 years of command, and every word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Black Talon, Mark. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Maya's entire body snapped to attention with military precision that would have impressed a drill instructor. Her civilian mask didn't just fall away, it shattered completely, revealing something underneath that made hardened soldiers take involuntary steps backward. "Sir, yes, sir," Maya replied, her voice now carrying the crisp authority of someone who had earned the right to speak as an equal to legends. "Mission parameters complete, sir." The transformation was complete and terrifying in its totality. Maya Chen, if that was even her real name, stood behind the Barrett with the kind of predatory stillness that made apex predators seem cuddly by comparison. Her oversized hoodie now looked less like civilian clothing and more like tactical camouflage, and her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had looked through crosshairs at human targets and pulled the trigger without hesitation. General Kane's approach was measured, deliberate, each footstep echoing through the tent like a countdown to revelation. The crowd parted before him instinctively, sensing they were in the presence of something far beyond their understanding. His weathered face bore the expression of a man who had orchestrated this moment with surgical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kane began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places. "You have just witnessed the final examination of the most classified sniper program in United States military history." Bull Morrison's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a nearby chair, his face cycling through shades of white that would have impressed a paint manufacturer. The man who had been dispensing condescending lectures about military expertise just minutes earlier now looked like he was contemplating early retirement. Maya began field stripping the Barrett with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Her hands moved with the kind of muscle memory that came from performing the same action thousands of times under every conceivable condition. Bolt carrier group, barrel assembly, trigger mechanism. Each component was removed and inspected with professional efficiency that would have impressed an armorer. 18 months, King continued, his eyes sweeping the stunned crowd. For 18 months, Specialist Maya Chen has been living a completely fabricated civilian identity. College student, part-time barista, member of the campus environmental club. Every aspect of her life was a carefully constructed lie designed to test one simple question. Can our most advanced operatives maintain perfect cover while retaining their lethal capabilities? Rodriguez crossed himself again and muttered something that sounded like a prayer for forgiveness. Jenkins had gone completely pale, his 1,000-yard stare now focused on Maya with something approaching religious awe. Martinez was frantically checking his phone, probably wondering if any of his social media posts about crazy civilians were about to come back to haunt him. "The Black Talon program," Kane explained, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture on advanced physics, represents the evolution of special operations warfare. Traditional sniper training focuses on marksmanship and fieldcraft. Black Talon operatives are trained in something far more complex, the ability to exist as ghosts in plain sight. Maya had finished disassembling the rifle and was now cleaning each component with the kind of attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. Her movements were economical, precise, and utterly professional. The nervous college girl who had stumbled into the tent was as gone as if she had never existed. Every interaction you witnessed today was part of her final assessment, King continued, his scarred face showing the faintest hint of pride. Maintaining cover identity under extreme social pressure, demonstrating technical competence without breaking character, and finally, executing a shot that would challenge our most experienced snipers while transitioning from civilian to operator in real time. The crowd was beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had witnessed, and the implications were staggering. Someone in the back called out, "How long has she been training?" Kane's smile was sharp as a blade. Specialist Chen was recruited at age 16 from a junior, our OTC program, where she was already outperforming college-level marksmen. She spent 2 years in advanced training before beginning her deep cover assignment. In total, she has been preparing for this moment for 4 years. Bull finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. The shot. That was impossible. The conditions, the distance, the moving target. Impossible for most people, Kane agreed. But Specialist Chen isn't most people. Her training regimen included shots at distances up to 2 miles in conditions that would ground military aircraft. What you saw today was actually well within her comfort zone. Maya spoke for the first time since her cover had been blown, her voice carrying the flat professionalism of someone delivering a mission report. "Sir, target engagement was successful using standard wind compensation algorithms. Environmental conditions were within acceptable parameters for the weapon system." The casual way she discussed what had seemed like a miracle shot sent chills through the crowd. This wasn't someone who had gotten lucky. This was someone for whom such shots were routine. But the real test, King continued, wasn't the marksmanship. Any competent sniper can hit a target under controlled conditions. The test was whether she could maintain her cover while being subjected to deliberate humiliation and social pressure designed to break her character. Bull's face went from white to green as the implications hit him. You mean this was all planned? The whole thing? Every word, Sergeant Morrison. Your reaction, your condescension, your attempt to humiliate what you perceived as a weak civilian, all of it was exactly what we needed to create the proper testing environment. Kane's voice carried no judgment. But Bull looked like he wanted to crawl. Under the nearest table, Maya had finished reassembling the Barrett and was now conducting a functions check with the kind of speed that suggested she could do it blindfolded. Each movement was precise, economical, and utterly professional. The psychological profile required for Black Talon operatives, Kane explained, includes the ability to absorb social abuse while maintaining operational readiness. In hostile territory, our operatives must be able to endure interrogation, humiliation, and psychological pressure while never breaking character. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward from the VIP section, carrying a tablet that displayed what appeared to be classified documents. Specialist Chen's cover identity was so complete that she maintained a 3.8 GPA in her fictional college courses, held down a part-time job, and even dated a civilian for 6 months, all while completing advanced sniper training during her study abroad periods. The crowd was struggling to process the implications. Someone had been living among them for 18 months. Someone capable of eliminating targets at impossible distances. And no one had suspected anything. The last training exercise, King continued, his voice taking on an ominous tone, was a war game conducted at Fort Irwin. 12 experienced special operations. Instructors were tasked with hunting down one target in a 50-square-mile area. The exercise was supposed to last 72 hours. Maya's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that suggested the memory wasn't entirely unpleasant. It lasted 14 hours, Kane revealed. Specialist Chen eliminated all 12 instructors using simulated ammunition. None of them ever saw her coming. The exercise had to be terminated early because we ran out of enemy personnel. The silence that followed was profound. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if nature itself was paying respect to the revelation. Maya shouldered her gear with movements that spoke of countless hours of practice. The college girl was completely gone now, replaced by something that moved with the fluid grace of a predator. When she looked at Bull, her expression was neutral, professional, and absolutely terrifying. Sergeant Morrison, she said, her voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. Your training methods are effective for conventional recruits. However, you might consider that appearances can be deceiving. Bull could only nod. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated as Maya walked toward the exit. Kane delivered his final revelation. Specialist Chen ships out for Afghanistan in 72 hours. Her mission is classified, but I can tell you that enemy snipers in her area of operations have a life expectancy measured in hours, not days. She paused at the tent entrance, turning back to address the crowd one final time. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had looked death in the eye and found it wanting. Thank you for the training exercise. It was educational. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke, leaving behind 50 people who would never again make assumptions about the quiet ones in the corner.